while we're waiting for my presentation to come up on the screen. For the record, my name is Kriscinda Hansen, and I am the CFO of the Gambling Commission. And when at the January meeting, I provided a budget update about our revenues based on numbers from the first quarter of the fiscal year, so the third quarter of the calendar year, and where we were. And at that time, I committed to coming back today and giving you further update, because the second quarter of the fiscal year filings were due January 31st. So I'm able to give some more updated numbers. Thank you. It says it's on. Is it? Hopefully people can hear me if they're virtual. So next slide, please. Thank you. So just a reminder again of what we did last year. Thank you for the confirmation about Mike. I saw a little thumbs up. Last year, when we brought before you the fact that we needed to do some work with the fees because of revenue concerns, we went through the same process that we're going through now, where we brought the issue before you. You chose to initiate rulemaking. We held some tribal consultation meetings, some stakeholder meetings. We had some proposed numbers based on feedback that we heard. We did some more work. The initial numbers that we proposed were estimated to carry us through the end of the biennium to generate enough revenue so that we would be able to operate through the end of biennium without concerns. After some feedback and some additional consideration, the changes that we made last year were estimated to carry us through the end of this fiscal year, with a couple acknowledgements. One, that we would probably be back before you to have the same conversation a year later. And then also that the changes that we made to the fees would not be significant enough to completely cover the revenue that we needed. And we committed to using some of our available fund balance to close any remaining gap between our revenue and expenditures. We estimated we would need to use up to $2.6 million over the fiscal year to close that. So the fees that ended up being changed were a 10% increase to the base fee, a 6% increase to the quarterly rate, and a 60% increase to the maximum annual license fee. And that was effective shortly before June 30. So next slide, please. So just a reminder about how that rollout happened and some assumptions that we made when we made those changes. We assumed, based on historical information, that we would see a 3% increase in gross gambling receipts reported by the organizations that report quarterly and potentially pay quarterly, depending on their business volume. And between the 3% increase in the gross gambling receipts and the changes to the fees, we assumed that would result in an additional $2 million in revenue. And then when the changes were effective, they rolled out not all at once, but they became effective as our entities renewed their licenses. So the table that you see here is just how many licensees that that the new rates were effective for each quarter. So next slide, please. So what we've seen is that gambling activity is cyclic, and that is what we're seeing here. The first two quarters on this slide are when COVID restrictions were still in place and then being lifted. So those receipts reported are significantly lower than what we see starting in, excuse me, the next quarter there. That's 2020. I cannot read from here. I apologize. The third bar on the graph. So what we see is that it is cyclic, with the first quarter of the calendar year being the highest. And it's a little challenging to tell here, but on the next slide, if you could please, we can see that if we compare the quarters in 2022 to the quarters in 2023, we did not see a 3% growth. As a matter of fact, for quarter 3 of 2023, it was just over a 4% decline in gross gambling receipts reported. In quarter 4, it was about a 1% decrease. So that has impacted our revenue projections. So next slide, please. So where this puts us now, as of January 31st, is that by looking at our revenue projections that we had used at the beginning of the fiscal year, we estimated that we would have 11.7 million in revenue for this fiscal year. What we're actually seeing is about 9.9 million, so a gap of 1.8. And that variance is for 2 reasons. One is that 3% gross gambling rate increase that we did not see, that has not been realized. And then also when I did these projections and we proposed these fee increases, I was still relatively new to the Gambling Commission, and I had not learned all the ins and outs and how we could implement things. So I had assumed at that point in time that all the changes would be effective July 1. I've since learned that those rate changes are effective as licenses renew. So we didn't have 100% of that new revenue all beginning in July. So those 2 factors are contributing to our $1.8 million gap that we're seeing now. Next slide, please. So what this means for us is that we are back because we're not going to have enough revenue in an ongoing fashion, even though we did adjust those fees. And what I will share with you is a projection of our fund balance for the next 18 months. So looking at that fund balance, I just want to make sure that I share the assumptions with everyone. I looked at our first 6 months of this fiscal year to estimate what our revenue would be. Because we didn't see the increase in gross gambling receipts, I've used our actual revenue and left our revenue projection flat. So no increase in our revenue based on the numbers that we have right now. Also, for our expenditures, I used the assumption that we would be spending what was approved in future months. So through 2024 fiscal year that ends June 30, the budget that was approved by commissioners last July, the monthly amount is what is used to estimate our expenditures moving forward. For fiscal year 25, I've used the budget that was approved last July and increased it by $800,000 because the governor's supplemental budget that was released showed that we would have an additional $800,000 expenditure, total expenditures over the next fiscal year in central service costs, which are non-discretionary spending. And then because we do know that costs are still increasing, the remainder of our 2025 budget that is not related to personnel, I increased that by 2%, just as an estimate of those increased costs. And then the last expenditure that was added for purposes of this projection is $500,000 for a software license renewal. We know that we're in the midst of our IT modernization project. We know that we will be buying software from a vendor to replace our current legacy systems. And with purchasing that software comes the obligation to pay annual license fees, which we have not had to do in the past. And we know from our RFI that those fees are going to be anywhere between $250,000 to $450,000, and then add tax and probably cost increases by the time we get a year out. $500,000 is the estimate that we used. So again, just the challenges about this is that you know, I wasn't aware of the rolling implementation when we did this last year, and trying to project our revenue has been extremely challenging because of that rolling implementation, but also because we're looking at multiple types of licenses that renew it multiple times throughout the year, and there's 3 variables to the fee. So it's extremely complex, and then layer on top of that we're trying to estimate what the gross gambling receipts that will be reported are. So those, just lots of variables going into this. So with that, next slide, please. So this slide is our projected available fund balance. So our fund balance at the end of December was the 4.37 million. And just to be clear, when I say available fund balance, if you go back and look at the slides that I presented last month, our overall fund balance then was about 19 million, but we have money set aside for our IT modernization project, for our records management system project, for access control project that we know we have to do. And we also have to keep in reserve a working capital balance. We hold 3 months because our revenue is cyclic by quarter. Our working capital balance that we hold in reserve is a quarter's worth of expenditures. So if we subtract out all those things that we know we already need money for, the money that is available after that at the end of December was the 4.37 million. So this is just showing our fund balance over time if we do nothing to change our fees, and both the revenue projection and our expenditure projections come true to what I've used with all the variables that I've mentioned. So what this is showing is that by March, the end of March of 2025, we would have about $340,000 in available fund balance. Anything after that, we would be into our working capital balance. So which the trend's not sustainable, obviously looking at the line. So, but I just wanted to explain where we are and where we're headed and what the timeline looks like, because rulemaking takes a lot of time. So next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, my paper hit the mic. In January, you voted to initiate rulemaking to address fees for organizations, not including sports wagering. If we choose to extend that, this is the potential change options that would still make adjustments before we are in the negative, or later timeline, we would be in the negative before we started realizing revenue. So it would be harder to come back out of that dip. But these are the alternate timelines if we don't, if you don't choose to have us come to you next month with proposed fees. So the soonest that we could have proposed fees for 102 would be next month. And then if we followed that timeline, the effective date of a new rule would be prior to June 30. So if we did not do that, these are the next 2 sets of timelines to align with quarterly filings and how it would affect our revenue. So, and that concludes my presentation.
Next question. Any of the commissioners have any questions? Yes.
A couple. So if you go back to the quarters the bars of the various quarters, so probably like slide 4 or 5.
Slide 5, if you can bring it back up.
That one will work.
Yeah. Okay.
So you pointed out Q3 of 2023 versus Q3 of 2022. Now, I mean, the gross gambling receipts were, 3.7 million different, but that's not 4%. That's of 250 million or 240 million. That's 1.3% maybe.
So I would have to go back and look at my exact numbers because.
Right. So go back one more slide.
Yes.
So it shows 247 on 37. So we'll just say 247.
Okay.
And then 3 of 2023 shows 243.5. So it's 3.5 million difference in gross gambling receipts. Am I reading that right?
Yes.
No, but as a percentage of 250 million, it's only about 1 point.
Oh, yeah, so correct, I apologize. So
No.
so what the difference is, the 4.7 is the gap, right? Because we expected 3, but not only did we not get 3, it shrunk. Yeah, so yes, I apologize.
Okay, so I just want
Yeah.
to make sure I wasn't reading that incorrectly.
No.
So if I can follow up. So I think it's completely understandable to have, lay this out and look at it as a potential 3% growth within gross gambling receipts. I mean, I don't know how much we can kind of, forecast going forward, but it looks like when I come to the assumptions page, that you've essentially said, okay, whatever happened the last 2 quarters of last year is kind of what we should anticipate going forward. So pretty conservative. And then the adding the governor's budget estimate, and plus actually adding another 2% to non-personnel costs. So, I mean, there's really, if any one of these performs better than what these new assumptions are, then we essentially have more time before we reach into our capital balance. Is that
Possibly, yes. So if revenue's better, expenditures are less, or both of those things are true, yes, we would have additional time before we approach 0. Yes.
Yes.
All right. And this and I'm not sure if, I mean, hopefully maybe folks from the industry might be able to help us out a little bit on this. So maybe it's open for a later discussion, but the third quarter 2022, I was, trying to go back into my Wayback Machine. Seems like that's kind of when everything opened back up.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether the industry felt like, that was like best quarter ever. Like people had been waiting. And then, so they kind of went out and splurged and then settled back down into kind of expected behavior. So, I mean, ultimately, I guess maybe this isn't a question so much as a statement, is it feels to me, especially, if you were to look at the next bar, we really only have, a year and a half kind of data, usable data here. And maybe that 2022 third quarter might have even been an anomaly. But if I look at it, I mean, we're really somewhere in the, 245 million is kind of what I'm seeing across here. There's a 251 million quarter, which hopefully if the first quarter of 2024 acts like that quarter, we're going to have, pretty good revenue, not probably the 3% growth, obviously that you were looking at. But it feels to me like we really don't have enough data to make drastic moves. I think it's really important that we have this information. I think it would be a big mistake on our part to do anything related to expenditures. I mean, I think we need to make sure that our staff realize that we are 100% supportive of the mission that they're doing, and that we will provide the resources they need to do that mission. So, wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I would. We need more staff. Yes, if that's the summary.
All right.
Yes.
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 Yeah. Maybe if there's any public comment that kind of tells us kind of what the industry is thinking and looking at, that'd be great.
I think Director Griffin wanted to say something.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted to just kind of give a update as to some of the feedback that we received and our meetings with tribal partners this Tuesday, as well as stakeholders, as we had another meeting with stakeholders and licensees on Tuesday as well. And so what we were looking for, obviously, is we rolled out this information because this was one of the questions we had as we presented our potential issue to you all in January. And given that it takes, from history, from last year, it takes 6 months to do rulemaking, and then another 12 months until we have everyone rolled into still not receiving a full year's worth of any fee increase. But so we need to do some pre-planning, and we're trying to be proactive here, but there were a lot of questions still outstanding. So at those meetings that we had on Tuesday, while we were informing and passing along the information that we had just received, like days earlier, yes, we did spend some time answering questions, but as I passed along to both groups, we were really there to listen to their ideas and suggestions for short-term and long-term sustainable funding for the agency. And so just to share just a little bit of that feedback, because even though we're in a rulemaking process, this feedback will be summarized and shared for you when you do take action or the rule actually comes before you, but just so that you're having timely information and you can, think about this as well. Good information that was shared. And so one thing that was shared was exactly to your point, Commissioner Sizemore, is that gambling is cyclical in the state. It has historically been cyclical, and according to operators continues to be cyclical. And that second quarter, of the first quarter of the year. So we're coming upon receiving that information, has historically been the highest quarter of the year, which was displayed here. Unfortunately, we moved into, so we tried to go back and get that data, and we don't really have that data in good format to go back and look at, because we switched to our new fee structure in middle of 2018, and not all licensees were rolled into the new fee structure and reporting until July or June of 2019. And then we went into pandemic, the middle of, or towards the end of the first quarter of 2020. So we'll continue to try to find that data to see if we can't provide any more historical information to go back and look at. The conversation focused on, yes, wait, things might show a change in terms of expected revenue. And so let's give this a little bit more time before we continue to make some decisions. Was information that was shared. Also, look at cost-cutting measures, take into consideration vacancy rates are usually at about 10%. And then lastly, fee increases were very erroneous to licensee. Like, there was a big burden. This last fee increase was a big burden for licensees. And so again, ask to kind of give them more time, give us all more time before decisions are made and action is taken. So with that, I would echo that while we have run a vacancy rate, I know that it's important for you all that we try to fill positions, which we are trying to fill position, like, 3 people scheduled to start within the next less than 30 days. And so we're thrilled about that. And so we would definitely ask that you allow us to continue to move forward to try to fill positions and not do a hold for vacancy rates. So that's the information, just in brief summary, that was provided, and I thought it might be beneficial for you all to take that into consideration.
Thank you. And Commissioner Ibsen, you have a question?
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions. Thank you for your presentation, Kriscinda. So clarifying question, first off, on slide 9 with the fund balance, does this assume full funding and full hiring of all the positions, or does it account for vacancy savings?
No, so well, setting the revenue part of the conversation aside, if you're asking about the expenditures, it assumes for projection purposes that we would be fully staffed, and fully expended every.
Okay.
Yes.
And more of a question of methodology with all your fiscal projections, not including just the fee side. This reminds me a lot of like OFM with the state budget process, and usually that's preceded with an economic analysis. And to Tina's point about gambling being cyclical, this is more just me being new and just curious about how the forecasting process works. But historically, do we tend to find that there are any patterns with anticipated gambling revenues, like with inflation versus recession? Or are there any trends that we tend to see more often than not as repeating patterns throughout history?
So unfortunately, I can't speak to that, both because I've only been here 2 years. We are working on trying to get access to former filing data in a way that we can apply it to this quarterly reporting. And also, I think, the data we do have has COVID thrown in the middle of it, which just really messes with everything. So I am going, if we are able to have more data to provide, we will definitely provide that. And that could probably play into some answers. So
And I imagine with the software upgrade, that'll also make budgeting analytics a lot easier moving forward, and also
that
just
is
historical
my hope.
analysis.
Yes,
Okay.
that is my hope.
Knock on wood. Thank you, Kriscinda.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Kriscinda. Do that update. Next, we will go to the legislative.
Excuse me, Chair, I did have one thing to help for March. I'm sorry. Could you, if you wouldn't mind, so that we are best prepared to bring the information that's before you in March, because that would be the earliest that we could file any language. But if you could kind of give us a direction of information that you'd like to see in March, do you want us to have a rule prepared? Are you thinking more time? Just kind of want to make sure that we're meeting the mark with what you think is best moving forward.
No one else wants to jump in. Yeah, I think that bringing forth a rule language next month or in April before we have more real hard data, I think sends the wrong message. I think it creates potentially some angst that that could be unsettling to the industry. So, not that I want anybody to have to scramble within the agency to try to figure, get something to us suddenly. I think if we just keep looking at the data, keep having, some conversations, I think that, because a proposal now would be like, here's the flat rate that we think we need to do, flat changes that we need to do. And I think that we're not prepared for that yet. So I guess, and I don't know how long it would take. I mean, I would love to know what the gross gambling receipts for each of the license classes are. Just so I can get it's just a little bit of more information that would say, house bank card rooms, here's what the gross gambling receipts are within this silo and pull tabs and, bingo and other nonprofits. So, I think that may, start us down a path of being able to dissect the various activities a little bit more. So, so that's something I would like to see in the next month or two, hopefully, to be able to further analyze, the big picture and try to make sure we're thoughtful going forward.
Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that kind of sums up what I was thinking. I just hadn't put it all together yet to get anything out. So good job. Besides,
Certainly wasn't looking for a motion or anything, just some discussion, and that's helpful if
you guys have any other information you'd be looking for? Or?
If I may, I just want to, just for clarity, the next significant revenue update that I would be able to provide would be at the May meeting because of the timing of the quarterly filings and they're not due until the end of the month after the close of the quarter. So they'd be due the April 30th with a short turnaround, but with a similar kind of presentation at the May meeting. I'd be able to, that would be the next significant revenue update.
Okay. And is there on the chart you provided, if we were to do something in May, do we know when that would put us?
I believe that would put us to either September or December for rulemaking.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
Thank
it would if we, I'm sorry, so slide 10, if we did that, if we wanted to have something effective by September 30, it would require a special meeting in June.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
And we'd have time for stakeholder work in the end of May and like essentially that 4 weeks in between May and whenever it's meeting.
Yeah, we would follow exactly what we did this month. We would quickly try to turn the numbers around, May 1st, May 2nd, and then follow basically the same schedule, try to meet on Monday or Tuesday with tribal partners, stakeholders, and then we'd have this meeting with, this topic. And then even if we were to move forward with the rule in March, we've set meeting dates aside for tribal partner and stakeholdering. So all of that we'll just push it now to the future. But we will definitely be bringing you monthly updates, at least on available fund balance, if not other conversations. Thank you.